As an engineer, I have noticed something about the way I think. I like rules. Not necessarily rules in the sense that somebody tells me what I am allowed or not allowed to do. I mean rules in the sense of models, frameworks, principles, something that helps me understand what is happening. If you give an engineer a complicated system, one of the first things we tend to do is break it down. What are the inputs? What are the outputs? What are the constraints? What are the variables? What can I influence? How do I know whether the system is performing well? And if the outcome is not good enough, what can I change? That is completely normal when we are designing a machine, developing software, or managing a technical project. But I sometimes catch myself doing exactly the same thing with life. And especially with one very difficult question: how do I live a good and happy life? Of course, life is not a machine. There is no mathematical formula where I can enter 5 parameters and receive happiness as an output. I actually think I would be dangerous to believe that. But I do think frameworks can help. They give us something to check against. If something doesn't feel right, instead of simply saying, I am unhappy, I can ask, why? What part of the system is struggling? Is something fundamental missing? Is my mentality causing the problem? Or am I simply optimizing for the wrong thing? Over the years, I have come across 3 frameworks that I keep returning to. They come from very different places. The first is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The second is the 4 C's of mental toughness: control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. And the third is a framework about happiness that I recently heard from a philosopher, Johnny Thompson. His 3 ideas are roughly this: pleasure is not the same as happiness. Moderation matters. And deep happiness is connected to virtue. What I find fascinating is that these 3 frameworks seem to fit together. And in this episode, I want to look at them almost like an engineer would look at the system. Not because they provide the formula for happiness, but because together they give me 3 useful questions. Do I have the foundations? Do I have the mentality? And am I moving in a direction that is actually worth moving toward? Let's start with the foundation. Many years ago, a friend of mine called Vasim told me about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And for some reason, the idea stayed with me. Abraham Maslow presented his theory of human motivation in the 1940s. Most of us know it today as a pyramid. At the bottom are basic physiological needs: food, water, sleep, the basic things our body requires. Then comes safety. After that, belonging and love. And then esteem. And toward the top, self-actualization. The desire to develop our capabilities and become what we have the potential to become. Now, psychologically, it is more complicated than a pyramid. Human beings don't always move neatly from one level to another. Maslow himself described the hierarchy in a more nuanced way than the simple diagram we often see today. But as a practical mental model, I find it incredibly useful because it tells me something very simple. Don't spend all your energy optimizing the roof while the foundation is unstable. An engineer immediately understands this idea. Imagine that I'm working on a complicated production system. I could optimize the user interface, I could improve reporting, I could add advanced analytics. But if the power supply is unstable, none of that matters very much. Fix the foundation first. And sometimes I think we forget this in life. We ask enormous questions. What is my purpose? Am I fulfilling my potential? Am I successful enough? Should I change my career? Should I start a company? What should I achieve in the next 10 years? Those can be important questions, but perhaps before asking them, there are simpler questions. Am I sleeping properly? Am I eating properly? Do I feel safe? Do I have people around me whom I trust? Do I have relationships in which I feel that I belong? Do I have some feeling of competence and self-respect? Sometimes a problem that looks philosophical might actually have a much more basic cause. Maybe I am not having an existential crisis. Maybe I haven't slept enough for 3 nights. And I think this is one of the reasons Maslow's framework has been useful to me. It gives me permission to take basic things seriously. Health matters, safety matters, family matters, friendship matters, belonging matters. And these are not small things that we should quickly finish so that we can move on to the important part of life. They are the important part of life. If those foundations are reasonably stable, then we have more capacity for everything else. We can be ambitious, we can experiment, we can take risks, we can create, we can help others, we can think about self-actualization. So my first engineering rule for life would be check the foundation before optimizing the system. But having a good foundation doesn't automatically mean that we achieve the things we want to achieve. You can be healthy, you can have friends, you can have security, and still struggle when a difficult project arrives. This is where my second framework becomes interesting. The 4 C's: control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. This model originally comes from research around mental toughness, but I like using it almost as a checklist when something difficult is in front of me. Suppose I have a project that is not going well. Instead of simply saying this project is difficult, I can inspect the 4 C's. Let's start with control. Control does not mean that I control everything. That would be unrealistic. Actually, trying to control everything can probably make us more stressed. For me, control means asking, what can I influence? And what can I not influence? This is an extremely important distinction. If I am waiting for a decision from somebody else, I cannot control their decision. But perhaps I can control whether I prepare properly. I can control whether I communicate clearly. I can control whether I make a second option. I can control how I respond. That shift is powerful. Because the moment I identify the part of the system that I can influence, I have somewhere to act. Then comes commitment. Do I actually intend to finish this? That sounds obvious, but think about how many projects we start without really committing to them. We like the idea, we are excited for 3 days, then another idea arrives. Commitment is what remains when excitement disappears. And I think engineers know this very well. The exciting part of a project is sometimes the beginning, the idea, the architecture, the possibilities. Then comes documentation, testing, debugging, meetings, corrections, another test, another correction, and suddenly success has much less to do with inspiration and much more to do with continuing. Then comes challenge. I particularly like this C because challenge changes how we interpret difficulty. A difficult situation can mean something is wrong. I should stop, or it can mean interesting. There is something here that I need to learn. Those interpretations create a very different reaction. If every obstacle is a proof of failure, life becomes exhausting. But if at least some obstacles can be treated as information, then difficulty becomes part of development. Again, very much like engineering. A failed test isn't always bad news. A failed test gives you data. You wanted to know whether the system worked under those conditions. Now you know that it doesn't. That information can improve the next version. Maybe we can sometimes look at personal setbacks in a similar way. Not every failure is a disaster. Not every failure. Some failures are measurements. And finally, confidence. Do I believe that I am capable of dealing with the situation? Not do I know exactly how to solve it. Those are two different things. Confidence doesn't require certainty. You can say, I don't know how to solve this yet, but I believe that I can learn enough to work it out. For an engineer, that is probably one of the most important forms of confidence. Because if we only worked on problems that we already knew how to solve, we would never engineer anything new. So when I am stuck, the 4 C's give me 4 questions. What can I control? Am I committed? Can I interpret this difficulty as a challenge rather than simply a threat? And do I have confidence that I can deal with it? This framework doesn't solve the project for me, but it tells me where the problem might be. And that is already incredibly useful. So the second engineering rule would be, when progress stops, diagnose the mentality before abandoning the goal. But there is still a problem. Imagine that I have a strong foundation from Maslow, and imagine that I also have control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. Now I can become extremely effective. But effective at what? You can optimize a machine perfectly for the wrong purpose. You can efficiently travel in the wrong direction. You can achieve every goal on your list and eventually discover that they were the wrong goals. So we need a third layer. And this brings me to happiness itself. I recently watched a video featuring the philosopher Johnny Thompson. He examined ideas about happiness across different philosophical traditions and identified 3 recurring themes. And I found them surprisingly practical. The first idea is, pleasure is not the same as happiness. This sounds obvious, but I think we forget it constantly. Eating something delicious gives pleasure. Buying something can give pleasure. Getting likes on social media can give pleasure. Watching another episode of a series instead of going to bed can give pleasure. But these moments of satisfaction are not automatically the same thing as a happy life. Sometimes they can even conflict with happiness. Think about eating. A fantastic meal can create pleasure, but if I eat far too much every evening, the repeated pursuit of pleasure can eventually damage my health. So we have an optimization problem. If I optimize every moment for immediate satisfaction, I might reduce the quality of the whole system over time. Engineers know this problem very well. Local optimizations does not necessarily produce global optimization. You can optimize one component and make the entire system worse. And I think we do this in life surprisingly often. We optimize the next 5 minutes. What would feel good now? But happiness is not measured over 5 minutes. Perhaps it is measured over years, maybe even over an entire lifetime. So when I choose between immediate satisfaction and something more difficult that matters to me in the long term, perhaps I should ask, what am I actually optimizing? The moment? or the life. The second pillar is moderation. I like this idea very much. And it reminds me of the Swedish concept of lagom. Not too much, not too little. Just the right amount. This sounds almost boring. We live in a culture that often celebrates extremes. Work harder, train harder, become richer, become faster, optimize everything. 10 times your productivity. Wake up at 5. Never eat sugar again. Exercise every day. Work 18 hours on your startup. Everything sounds more impressive when it is extreme, but sustainable systems usually don't operate permanently at their maximum limit. If you run a machine at 100% of its theoretical capacity all the time, you probably shouldn't be surprised if maintenance becomes a problem. A good system needs margin. Life probably does too. Eating is a simple example. Eating too little is bad. Eating far too much is also bad. Moderation sits somewhere between the two. Exercise is similar. Too little movement is unhealthy, but extreme training without enough recovery can also create problems. Work is similar. Doing nothing may not create satisfaction, but working continuously, without rest, can eventually destroy the reason you were working in the first place. Even ambition may need moderation. I don't think moderation means having no ambition. I think it means asking whether something is sustainable. Can I do this not only today but again tomorrow and next month and perhaps next year? That might actually be a better engineering criterion than maximum performance. Don't design your life for peak output. Design it for sustainable operation. And then there is Thompson's third pillar, virtue. This is perhaps the most philosophical one. And I find it extremely interesting because sooner or later we arrive at the question, what is the point of all this? Why am I trying to become successful? Why am I trying to improve myself? What should I actually use my capabilities for? And the search for one ultimate answer to the meaning of life can become endless. Perhaps there isn't a single answer that can be calculated, but one practical possibility is to choose virtues that you believe are worth following. For example, kindness, justice, wisdom, humility, altruism, honesty, responsibility. You don't need to solve the entire philosophical question of human existence before deciding that helping another person is probably better than hurting them. And I find this idea liberating. Perhaps I don't need the complete specification for life. Maybe I just need some good design principles. If I choose, for example, kindness as a virtue, then that virtue can influence many small decisions. How do I speak to somebody when we disagree? How do I react when someone makes a mistake? How do I use my knowledge? How do I treat somebody who cannot give me anything in return? Philanthropy would be another example. It doesn't necessarily mean donating millions. It could simply mean having the principle that when I am able to create value for somebody else, that is something worth doing. Virtue gives direction. And that is important because efficiency without direction can be dangerous. An engineer doesn't only ask, can we build it? A good engineer should also sometimes ask, should we build it? And this is where my three frameworks suddenly start to connect. Maslow asks, is the foundation stable? The four C's ask, do I have the mentality to move forward? And the philosophy of happiness asks, am I moving towards something that actually makes life better? Foundation, execution, and direction. That almost sounds like a system architecture. And perhaps that's my engineering approach to a happy life. Not a formula, not a guarantee, and definitely not 3 laws that everybody has to follow. They are diagnostic tools. When something doesn't feel right, I can ask myself, is there a basic need that I'm neglecting? Maybe I'm trying to solve a career problem when what I really need is sleep, security, or connection. If the foundation is okay, I can ask, which of the 4 C's is missing? Have I focused too much on what I cannot control? Have I lost commitment? Am I interpreting every challenge as a threat? Have I lost confidence in my ability to learn? And if all those things are working, I can ask the hardest question. What am I optimizing for? Am I confusing pleasure with happiness? Am I pushing something toward an unhealthy extreme? And am I living according to virtues that I actually respect? There's one final lesson here that I think engineers especially need to remember. Not everything needs to be optimized. This might be the hardest rule of all. Human beings aren't machines. Friendships are not efficiency projects. Children are not projects. A dinner with friends doesn't need a KPI. A walk doesn't need to achieve anything. Sometimes the best part of life is precisely that nothing is being optimized. The frameworks should serve life. Life shouldn't serve the frameworks. So perhaps the engineering approach to happiness has a paradox inside it. Use models, measure sometimes, reflect, learn from failure, improve what can be improved, but also know when to stop engineering. Because ultimately happiness may not be an output that we can manufacture. Maybe it emerges when enough important parts of life are working reasonably well. When our foundations are secure, when we feel capable of facing challenges, when we don't mistake every pleasure for happiness, when we avoid unnecessary extremes, and when we try to become the kind of person we ourselves would respect. That is probably not a perfect formula, but so far, it has been a useful framework for me. And like any good engineering model, it doesn't need to explain everything. It just needs to help us make a slightly better decision when the next difficult question arrives. Thank you for listening to East Meets Swiss.